Hello and welcome to Vulgar History, a feminist women's history comedy podcast. My name is Anne Foster, and today we are talking about one of the biggest scandals of the British royal family of the 20th century. That is the abdication of King Edward VIII for the love of the American divorcee, Wallis Simpson. And this is the setting of the novel written by today's guest, who is Melanie Benjamin. She's the author of a new historical fiction novel called The Windsor Affair. The abdication is a major plot point in this whole story, but there's two main characters in this. And one of them is American divorcee, Wallis Simpson, and the other one is Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, who is AKA Queen Elizabeth, not to be confused with the Queen Elizabeth II, who just passed away a few years ago. It's her mom. She was known in her life as the Queen Mum. Anyway, they were sisters-in-law. They married two British royal men. One of these women was American. One of these women was British. One of these women was a tabloid, greatly hated figure, and one of these people was a very domestic, very protected by the royal family, and people only spoke about the nice things about her. But the thing is that it's a real sort of Real Housewives of 20th century England sort of vibe, because these two women hated each other in real life. This is a fact. And there's never been a novel written before about the relationship between these two women. So when I saw that Melanie Benjamin had written this novel, The Windsor Affair, I had to have her on the podcast, and I'm so happy she said yes. And so please enjoy this conversation about the scandalous lives of the British royal family 100 years ago, practically, in this conversation with author Melanie Benjamin, whose new book is called The Windsor Affair. So I'm joined here today by author Melanie Benjamin to talk about your newest book, just out this week, The Windsor Affair. Welcome, Melanie.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Anne. I love your podcast.
I'm so excited to talk about this because I haven't done a lot of 20th century on my podcast, and this is your wheelhouse. Like, you've written numerous historical fiction before, a lot of it set in the 20th century, and this is, am I wrong, this is your first royal-based book?
It is. It is my first one. Yeah. It's very similar, I think, in a lot of ways to a previous novel of mine called The Swans of Fifth Avenue. That was about Truman Capote and Babe Paley and all the swans. In that it is set, and there are some intersecting characters, like I throw in some Easter eggs, like Babe Paley makes an appearance in this novel. So that high society, kind of gossipy and also rather bitchy milieu is they share that DNA in this, but it is the first one I have done about the royal family. My first historical novel, Alice I Have Been, Queen Victoria's youngest son, Prince Leopold, was a character in that, but it wasn't his story. So that would be my only other brush with royalty.
Well, and this is a story, we were just chatting a bit before we started recording, where I, as a historian, as somebody I'm in Canada, the royal family is always being discussed here. I kind of knew about this sequence of events, but not everybody does. So I was wondering if you can set the scene. Your book is about two women who marry brothers and their contentious relationship. So just set the scene.
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, have fun. So there were two Windsor brothers. Let's start there. Very similar to current Windsor brothers in a way. One was the heir to the throne. The other was the spare. So it was David, the Prince of Wales, who became King Edward VIII. And his younger brother, George, everyone called him Albert, George. Everyone called him Bertie. And so these were the sons of King George V. So this is like after World War I, and everyone comes to World War I. And we've got the roaring 20s. This is kind of like latter Downton Abbey years. We have the roaring 20s. And then we get to the 30s. The heir to the throne, the Prince of Wales, was very, very popular at the time. He was a very handsome man.
I was looking at pictures. Well, I wasn't looking at pictures, but I came across pictures when I was just reminding myself of some of the history. And I'm like, oh, he was good looking. He was. Yeah.
Yeah, and very stylish, actually. Like, he set a lot of fashion trends. He was very au courant, I think, of that. He was too modern and had a lot of issues. His father had an awful lot of issues with him because David was really clear that when he became king, he was going to modernize a lot of things. David also had a fondness for falling in love with divorced married women. including some Americans. Now, in that time period after World War One, like prior to World War One, he would have been expected to marry a royal princess of Europe. That's just what the heir to the throne would do. After World War One, there literally wasn't as much royalty around. After all, so many thrones toppled in that, so he could have probably gotten away with like his his nephew did later, marrying a commoner, someone who might have been would have been aristocratic, but maybe not royalty. But he just showed no signs of wanting to settle down, marry a suitable virgin, and have royal children to guarantee the succession. His younger brother, Bertie, did actually fall in love with a Scottish aristocrat named Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon. They married in the 1920s and they settled down and they had two little girls, Elizabeth and Margaret, and they were very domestic and they were very more in line with what people expected their royalty to do, but they were kind of dull in that way too.
Well, and I want to say too, like in terms of just what everybody looks like, just because this is a big thing in your book, kind of the one couple is glamorous and the other couple is decidedly less so. So we've got David is very handsome. Bertie is more he looks more in line with kind of what I don't know, if you think of like today, like King Charles. He just looks like what you think the British royals look like. Just kind of like, okay, he's wearing a suit, but he's not, like, ooh.
Not glamorous. And he didn't seek, he had speech impediment that famously, if you've ever seen the movie The King's Speech, he had a stutter. He supposedly had some other tics, had some nervous habits. He had a real terrible temper. Bertie was just not glamorous in the way that his younger brother David was. And he was okay with that. He was fine with that. He didn't want the spotlight. And he married a very traditional, I guess, a Scottish earl's daughter, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon.
So I wanted to mention too, so you were saying like David as the heir to the throne, he would probably be expected to marry a royal, like maybe some sort of the royals who are left, find some young woman.
Yeah.
But Albert married effectively, a very wealthy person, a titled person, but still a commoner, technically.
A commoner, and that she was not royal. I think today people don't understand commoner because I've seen a lot of people refer to Kate Middleton as the first commoner to marry, into the British royal family, which is not true. Diana was a commoner, but Diana was an aristocrat, and the same with Elizabeth. She didn't have a drop of royal blood, but she was an aristocrat. So she's at home in this world. Yeah. So David, back to the glamorous Prince of Wales, who is like a matinee idol. All the women love him. There was actually a song called "I Danced with a boy who danced with a girl who danced with the Prince of Wales." That was a popular song at the time. Everybody loved him. He was in the middle of an affair with an American married woman named Thelma Furness, who you might know as Gloria Vanderbilt's aunt. She and her sister Gloria were twins, the fabulous. They were, I think their main name is Morgan, and they both went on to marry lots of aristocratic men. And by this, Thelma was married to a British man who was some kind of lord, and so she was Lady Furness. She and David, the Prince of Wales, had a very kind of open affair. So they were part of the whole British kind of the upper class nightlife, crowd. And they would frequent nightclubs and hold fabulous parties at his private residence called the Fort. It was Fort Belvedere on the grounds of the Windsor estate. That was his alone, his private place. And the king very much frowned on everything that happened there. The king was very old-fashioned and very worried about his playboy prince son, the heir to the throne. And by this time, now we're in the 1930s, the king is not well. And so there is an urgency for David, on the behalf of everyone involved. David needs to settle down. He needs to stop playing around with these American married women. And then we enter Wallis Simpson, who is a already divorced married woman, who is married to just a kind of an upper class British guy. And she's an American. She's Thelma's friend. She meets the Prince of Wales. They get into his circle. It's very advantageous for Wallis and her husband to be friends with the Prince of Wales. They get some contacts that help his business. She gets to be, swatting around with the Prince of Wales group. And then Thelma goes off to America to be with her sister. And Thelma asks Wallis to take care of David while she's gone, be his friend.
This is like, okay, so it's the 20th century, it's the 1930s.
It's like 1930s.
But this feels so similar to how kings in British history, almost all of them, have long had mistresses. Like, I've just finished doing a whole series about the Regency era. And what surprised me about that time was the princess at that time, like, they were having affairs with married women. Like, this, what he's doing, what David is doing is like classic British royal family.
And nobody had a problem. Here's the funny thing. Like, had he just married a suitable woman and kept having these affairs, no one would have had a problem with it. It really was like accepted, like, okay, that's what kings do. The problem was he falls in love with Wallis Simpson. He falls head over heels, crazy, obsessively in love with this married American woman, and decides he's going to marry her and stay on the throne. So she has to get another divorce in order for this to happen. So
because she's already married. Yeah.
Right. So she would have been a twice divorced American woman marrying the future King of England, head of the Church of England. This was never, ever going to be allowed to happen.
Can you explain about the Church of England angle about like marrying a divorcee?
Yeah. So in that time, and it really wasn't until very recently, the Church of England just did not sanction divorce. It was, like a very just Catholic adjacent in that, if you were a divorce, you were just not recognized. You would have to leave the church, basically. And then, as now, the person occupying the throne is also the head of the Church of England. We all know this all started back with Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn and that all that. So people back then, and I think they do still now, because I've heard some people kind of not happy with the fact that like Prince William is not much of a churchgoer. I've heard this is kind of becoming an issue because he will be the head of the Church of England when he is crowned. And unlike his father and grandmother, who are and were devout, I guess William is not. And so I've heard people talking about this already. So it could be a thing again.
Well, and then also the current King Charles, his Camilla is divorced.
Right.
So
and
I
so
think it took a long time, like decades, for them to be able to figure that out. Yeah.
I think when Margaret's divorce came along in the 60s, right? Or early 70s, when she divorced Tony Armstrong Jones, that was kind of the first wedge of divorce being allowed in the royal family. And then soon after that, Princess Anne, famously divorced, and Charles and Diana, Fergie and Andrew, so it's now it's kind of common, but for sure back in 1935, 36, this was not going to be allowed. So we're setting this thing up, this huge crisis, the abdication crisis that we call it, where David doesn't play his part. I don't think anyone, let alone Wallis Simpson, expected him to want to marry her.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was the last thing she wanted him to do was want to marry her. And so he causes this enormous crisis in 1935, 36.
I think
King George dies.
Yeah, but it's like George dies in January, and then it's that year.
36. Yeah. They call it
December, yeah.
They call it the year of three kings because George V dies in January of 36. So David is now the heir to the throne. And suddenly, he's on the throne. He is the king. And suddenly Bertie is now the heir to the throne. But even then, everyone expects that David will eventually marry someone and produce heirs. So no one really ever thinks at this point that Bertie or his oldest daughter, Elizabeth, are ever going to be on the throne. But David doesn't play by the book. He gets more and more and more obsessed with Wallis Simpson. And it causes a crisis. The British papers laid off for a very, very long time. Like the rest of the world knew what was going on. It was very big in the American press, the Canadian press, European press, but he had a deal with Lord Beaverbrook, who was kind of controlled the press in England at the time, that they wouldn't report about all this. But he makes Wallis get a divorce so that he can marry her, and then all hell breaks loose.
This is a crucial detail that I didn't put together in my mind, that at the time he becomes king, like, I just knew Wallis Simpson, she's a divorcee. I didn't realize she was actively still married.
Married to Simpson, Ernest Simpson.
So
Yeah.
this is like, even if these events played out today, the fact that she's still married just makes it even more scandalous, I think. It's not,
Oh,
she was divorced
absolutely.
5 years ago. It's like, no, she's not even divorced yet.
Actively still married.
Yeah.
And her husband plays, the beard, I guess you could call it. I mean, he willingly does for a very, very long time look the other way while his future king is romancing his wife, because it's beneficial to him in some way. He was a very thorough, patriotic Englishman too. And it was like, well, this makes my king happy, or my future king happy. I'm okay with it. But then when David then, after he becomes king, before he's crowned, but after he becomes king, he takes Ernest to lunch and says, I will not be crowned without Wallis by my side. So this is what he starts telling everyone, the Prime Minister Stanley Baldwin, his brother Bertie, who's suddenly extremely panic-stricken because he's starting to realize, oh my God, I might have to be king. And it just was not what he wanted at all. Whether or not it's what his wife Elizabeth wanted, I don't think she did want it at first, but I think she realized she'd be good at it. Once it happened. But I don't think she sought it out. I think she was a very fundamentally self-indulgent person who didn't necessarily want to uproot her very cozy life.
Yeah, her little domestic life that they're having. Yeah.
Living in royal palaces with nannies and just enjoying their children and having a swell old time. So this all happens. It's a crisis. He famously abdicates the throne in December of 1936, giving it all up for the woman I love, the famous abdication speech.
No, I want to say that. So he said, he calls her the woman I love. And as somebody, myself personally, who grew up watching a lot of daytime soap operas, that's a phrase that people say so much. The man I love, the woman I love. Like, he really coined this. And that's what sort of set the tone for how people understand their ongoing relationship, because they do get married and they're together for a long time.
30 some years. Yeah.
Love affair. Like when he said that, which we can talk about that if you want, but was it?
Yeah, that's the thing. So this is setting the stage for my book. All this happens in my book, but my novel is really about the two women at the center of all this, Wallis Simpson and her rival Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, because all this happens. The abdication happens. She has already left. Wallis has divorced and left England to get away, because suddenly the press is talking about it, and she's actually, she's under attack. People hate her. They don't see this as this great love affair. I mean, I think David had a very arrogant, I'm the king. Of course, they're going to support anything I do because I'm the king, and they've always loved me, and they have always loved him. But they do not love the idea of an American, once divorced woman. They can't even imagine her on the throne. She has fled to the continent. She's over in France, staying with friends. When he makes this famous speech, she's not even there. There have been some depictions of her standing beside him as he's making this speech. I think The Crown did that. That is not true. She was in France. And then he goes over on the continent and waits until her divorce is final, and then they get married because they have to, because by then she is stuck. I think that's and so meanwhile, we have Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon on the other side, seeing her husband, who was very ill prepared and not psychologically suited to be king, suddenly, and then her little daughter, who is going to suddenly have her life completely changed. And so she's dealing with the fallout while also ascending the throne. And suddenly she is Queen Elizabeth. And the two women became bitter rivals. I mean, they started out as friendly enough when they first met in the 30s. But as it became clearer and clearer that David was completely obsessed with her and was forcing her upon everyone, then the two women became very, very bitter enemies. And that is my book.
The Windsor Affair. So,
Yeah.
and that's what I think it says in the afterword of your book. You're describing sort of how this book came to be, and you said in there that you thought, well, of course, someone's already written this book. It's such a juicy topic, and it turns out no one had.
No.
Yeah,
There have been, I mean, there's certainly a lot of biographies of both women, books about the abdication crisis, books about the Windsor brothers. There's been a couple of historical novels about Wallis, but none about Elizabeth and none about the two of them during this crisis and their lifelong relationship, because, it certainly to the end of their lives.
and they're
They were the
both
last.
fairly long lived. Yeah, they both outlived their husbands.
Well, we know Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, she lives to be 100.
Yeah,
Wallis lives into her late 80s, but unfortunately, for the last 15 years of her life, she was basically bedridden with dementia. So she didn't have, but their lives were intertwined. And I found that I felt they had a lot of things in common. They were both very strong women, married to very weak men. And because I think it's very well established that David and his brother Bertie and all the children of King George V and Queen Mary, they didn't have good relationships with their parents at all. There was not a lot of love. And they were both kind of starved for their mother's love. And I think they found it in these different women. They needed strong women. I think they just were kind of lost little boys all their lives. But Elizabeth always blamed Wallis for the early death of her husband. Bertie died in 1953. He was only like 48. The war took its toll on his health, and started smoking a million cigarettes a day. As both Windsor men died of, as their father did, of respiratory diseases because of smoking. But Elizabeth Bertie, their beginnings were rocky. She turned down his proposal twice before finally accepting it. But they ended up, I think, genuinely, that was a love affair. Their marriage was genuinely happy. And you could not say the same thing, I don't think, for Wallis and David at all. I mean, I think at the heart of it, Wallis did not want him to abdicate for her. She knew that she would be stuck for life if he abdicated for her. Like the moment she figured out she was not going to be allowed to be queen, and she's a strangely inactive, like strangely like unable to make a decision during this time. I think she wanted to leave then, like just leave the scene, go back to America. But she seemed unable to move as he was bulldozing her into getting divorced. I don't think she wanted to get divorced. I think she would have been happy remaining his wife and being, the king's mistress on the side, like we said they used to do in the Regency era. But, he forced it all, and she found herself tied to a man I don't think she truly loved.
well, and that's the thing, and that's what I find really interesting in your retelling, and also just in history, the fact that Wallis was just kind of stuck with this guy. And and neither of them knew really, I think she suspected more than David did, what this was going to mean. But once he abdicated, they were tethered to each other, but also they just effectively went into sort of exile. They were stuck together. And like, even if they had some sort of other lifestyle that they could have gotten into, where they could have socialized more, but they were just stuck together. They were sent to the Caribbean. So even like these cracks in the foundation of their relationship, you couldn't look away from them because they couldn't get away from each other.
Yeah, it was a strange thing. No, there had never been a living king who had abdicated his throne voluntarily until this happened. So no one knew what to do with a former living king. It simply had never happened. And I think David was naive, and he thought, well, of course I'll be allowed to return to England, because I truly think he deeply, deeply loved England and Scotland. And he didn't think he would not be allowed to return. That was just, he really thought, I'll go away. I'll let my brother get crowned. I'll go marry Wallis. And eventually, because they left all their stuff at the fort because they thought they were going to be able to come back. But it became very clear the British government, Stanley Baldwin at first, and then Neville Chamberlain, and eventually Churchill, they were like, we can't have a living king, ex-king, living in the same country as our current king. Because, look, Shakespeare, right? Like, this is the stuff of Shakespeare, where brothers are fighting brothers for the crown. And while no one really thought it was going to be violent, there was on the part of the government and Bertie and Elizabeth's circle of real fear that David might go off and marry her and then come back. He had a lot of fans. There were a lot of people who were heartbroken to see him go. Subjects, people in the government. Actually, Churchill was a big, good friend of him up to a certain point. And they really had a genuine fear that he might come back and stage a coup, try to regain the throne again. So very quickly, it was resolved that, he can't come home now. He cannot come home now. Had World War II not happened, perhaps he might have been allowed. They might have been able to figure out some kind of role for him, and he might have been able to return and live in England. But after World War II, it was very clear because of his.
We need to get into this.
Hitler. Yeah, we'll talk about that. And they were spying. The British government was spying on every move he made. And they knew that he was okay with the idea of Hitler conquering England and setting David and Wallis up as kind of a puppet king and queen. This had been a plan floated by the Nazi government to David and Wallis. We think they knew about it. We don't know if they agreed to it, but we think they were aware of it.
And they were photographed with Hitler.
Photographed with Hitler in the 30s before the war started. David was very much against the idea of another world war. He had not been allowed to serve during World War I because of fears of his capture. Although Bertie did serve on a battleship in World War I. David saw the carnage of that war and the lost generation of men, and very much didn't want it to happen. And that was his initial kind of, he admired Hitler, unfortunately, but he also very much did not want his country to go to war again. So he was very much about appeasement. It was like, let's get on the right side of history this time, not the wrong side. Let's ally with Germany instead of France. The royal family and the government became aware of all that. And then we get through the war, and David and Wallis are sent to be he's sent to be the governor of the Bahamas during the war. They had to get him as far away from England as possible. His punishment was the point where the English family and government said he can never return. Mm-hmm. That was his punishment, the exile, the continued exile.
I'm just thinking about, like you mentioned, Shakespeare plays and stuff, to have like a king and then someone who might have supporters and maybe some people think should be the king. And I can understand, especially as you're just describing, like with World War II, the danger of having just a freelance royal out there in the world who might be making I don't want to make a direct comparison, but I will say it reminds me of some of the stuff that Andrew Mountbatten Windsor got up to, where it's just like, if you're a royal and you have a certain level of perceived influence or power, people might, and you're kind of dumb, people might try to deal with you, and then suddenly, before you know it, you're doing a treason.
Yeah. Well, that's true. He didn't understand. They're like, you are the former king of England. Everything you do, people think you're acting on behalf of the government. Yeah. Even though Bertie was very clear, the government and the king were like very, very like, you do not represent us.
And now for a quick advertising break. And we're back.
After the abdication and Wallis and David are married, soon after that, this is when they go to Nazi Germany and Austria. And they meet Hitler and the photographs of Hitler. So it's kind of like a royal tour, you might say, even though it wasn't. It was not funded by the British government. But it was, he was used to going on royal tours when he was Prince of Wales. So when the Nazi government invites them, it's kind of like the world saw it almost as a, the British royal
It seems like
court.
he's a representative. Yeah.
And he's absolutely not. And everyone in England is just horrified that he's over there. So he and Wallis intended to do another tour to the United States after that. And the government then said, you will not. You cannot. We will, and he at least was trained to listen to what his prime minister said to the government said. He didn't push it. He wasn't happy about it. David, he just did, but he didn't push it. He didn't, and he didn't. There was always a line that he wouldn't cross when it came to his dealings with the royal family after the abdication. He was constantly asking for money, constantly, and of course, it was a very big deal when Wallis was not given the title of Her Royal Highness, which she should have been given. Let's just say in the Constitution and everything and everything in the British government, she should have been given that. It was very petty that the King and Elizabeth, mostly, didn't allow that. And that was always a source of a lot of friction between the Windsors. They became the Duke and Duchess of Windsor and the rest of the royal family. But there was a line. If the government told him, no, you can't do it, he didn't do it. And when the government sent him to be governor of Bahamas during World War II, while he didn't want to do it, he did it. There was always a line that David would not cross when it came to the royal family.
I'm just wondering, like, the timeline of you writing this book. This stuff's been happening with, like, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor over the past year. I presume your book was done at that point. But even before all of the hate and everything happened with Meghan Markle, the fact that she was an American divorcee, people are like, oh, we've seen this before. We've seen this before. And now to have Meghan and Harry be sort of kind of royals, but not really royals, and doing kind of royal tours, but not really royal tours. So there's a lot of, like, this is kind of the only precedent.
It is.
We'll see. Yeah.
So similar in a lot of ways. I think both women have some similarities, Meghan Markle and Wallis, but they're different women in different generations. So when Harry and Meghan go to places like Australia, like they recently did, I think it's a different situation where, because they did say, we will give up the money. We will not be working royals. I mean, they didn't want to do it that way, but then they accepted it. So they're not like constantly begging the royal family for money like the way the Windsors were. Harry is got a lot of money on his own from Diana. Actually, he's very wealthy because of her estate. But there's this like, I think, I wish, like the Windsors, we talk about how the Windsors had such empty lives after the abdication, right? Because they didn't have anything to do. They still thought they should be treated like a king and queen. They still acted like he was a king. They still, demanded to be served and bowed to and everything like he was a king. I don't think Harry and Meghan are like that at all. I mean, I think they completely accept a different reality. But I think had the Windsors decided to focus on charitable things, they would have had a lot easier later, marriage and life, and a life with a purpose. But they just didn't. They just indulged and indulged and indulged and indulged. And their life was one long empty party. And it was sad. Whereas where I think Harry and Meghan have a chance, I don't know that they've done it yet, but they have a chance if they do kind of maybe pivot less toward the Netflix shows and things and more toward the good works, then they may have a happier, rest of their time, but I think it's a choice. But the Windsors they didn't make that choice.
They sort of lived in, and I mean, as we're guessing, because as any historical fiction novelist does, like what you think was happening based on what the facts are. But it's just sort of a life, especially for David, of just bitterness, feeling like I should have this life and I don't. And just not finding a different way to live, but just being mad about the life that you don't have.
Well, he didn't think it through. I mean, I don't think he was the sharpest tool in the shed. I mean, I have to say, I don't think any of the Windsor men of that era, anyway, were all that, all that intelligent. Again, they married women who were extremely bright and extremely smart and extremely strategic. they weren't. But again, there wasn't a precedent for anything that he had done. So everyone's kind of making it up as they go along. And also, when we get back to Wallis and Meghan Markle, there are similarities in that they were both American women and divorced. But Wallis was born in a time when a woman couldn't make her own life. Like, she was dependent on men from the time she was born for money, for society, for a home, for security. She was born into this kind of like upper, old Southern kind of aristocratic families in Baltimore. But her mother married the poor younger brother and he died. And so they were always dependent on her Uncle Saul as she was growing up for everything. And then when she wanted to get away from Uncle Saul, her only choice was to marry. So, she learned that very quickly, Wallis did, that men were her only key to the future she wanted. She was an ambitious woman. She wanted security, but she wanted nice things, and she wanted society. She wanted grand homes, and she wanted servants. And the only way to get that was to marry the right man. And the first man she married was not the right man. The second one was more, but he still didn't give her everything that the Prince of Wales could give her. So, but Meghan, she's not that. She had a career before she met Harry. She's a woman of her times, right? She's a strong woman with her own career. She didn't need Harry to buy her fancy clothes and jewels the way that Windsor or Wallis needed David. So that's, I think, where the similarities kind of end, right?
Yeah, and that's why I think it can be sort of facile sometimes when people are trying to criticize Meghan Markle to be like, and they're explaining, she's a gold digger and this and this and this. It's like she was a millionaire when she met him because of her acting career. Like,
it's not the same.
Well, but also to not demonize Wallis Simpson, where it's like, to get ahead in life, you had to marry strategically. Absolutely. And she did. And that doesn't make her, that's not a bad choice if that's the only choice you have. If the choice is to like be poor or marry well, you shouldn't demonize someone who married well. But can we flip over to Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon?
Yeah, sure.
That's where, I could talk about Wallis all day, but where your book is really, a strength of your book, I think, is that you're focusing on the two women and their similarities and the differences. And Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon is a much less examined figure as a young woman. Even the movie you mentioned, like The King's Speech, it's like about Bertie and his speech therapy. And Helena Bonham Carter is there being supportive and lovely. But I love to dig in behind to sort of imagine what maybe was she really like? She couldn't have just been lovely and smiling and happy 24 hours a day. And that's what your book gets into. And that's where I found it really interesting.
Yeah, so we do have that image of Wallis as a scheming woman and the power behind the throne in a lot of ways, and manipulative, and certainly I think she was things, but I think like you said, we go back to her childhood. There's a reason, and then she runs into this kind of wall that is Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, and the Queen Mum. I mean, everyone has this image of the Queen Mum. She lived to be 100 and some, so not that long ago that she died. And this, smiling, lovely, beloved figure, the kind of the face of domesticity for the royal family, and like also very, the face of British pluck during World War II. Things that she really was. But she also, there was more to her than that. I think a lot of people like to compare her to Kate. And I think there are a lot of similarities there too, in that they both kind of embody the more domestic side of the royal family. They're mothers first before they're women, I think, in many people's minds. They don't rock the boat, unlike a Wallis or a Meghan, who brought modernity to their roles, who were more of their actual times. And I think Kate and Elizabeth were more like of a generation or two in the past, but that's not to say they weren't just as strong. But they just did it, I would say, in what might be more, and I'm using quotes here, quote unquote, acceptable way for women to exert power versus naked ambition. They kind of closed it a little bit.
Well, and it's just funny that the two examples, which again are for very different women and very different circumstances, but we've got the British woman versus the American woman. And there's something about Americans are more brash and sell it like it is. And British women, it's like, oh, quiet, smiling, polite, friendly. It's just funny
But yet,
yeah.
It is very, very similar, I think. And again, I kind of go back to the idea of the family thing. Like, even before they became the king and queen, Elizabeth and Bertie were just beloved for being the Duke and Duchess of York. That was their title. And just this domestic unit that with their beautiful little English princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret Rose, and they just embodied this ideal family. And I see that today with Kate and William and their 3 children too, right? So, but getting back to Elizabeth. So Elizabeth was born the daughter of a Scottish earl. And she was born, actually where she was born is her mother doesn't even remember where she was born. Her mother had like 11 children. But Glamis Castle in Scotland, which was the castle that Shakespeare had in mind when he wrote Macbeth, took place in Glamis Castle. That is where Elizabeth, that was her hereditary castle in Scotland. And she was the last, she was the youngest. Her brother might have been, I think she and her brother were like very young, and her siblings were much older. And so she was a very spoiled little girl. Loved and had her governesses, and they had several homes and a townhome in London and the Blues Castle, and very loving family. World War I comes along like it did with everyone, and she lost one brother in battle and one brother permanently mentally injured because of the war, and their home was turned into a convalescent home for a lot of soldiers, and
like
so kind of a
Abbey.
Yeah. And so like Elizabeth kind of, as she's growing into a young woman at the time of the war, she would, she got very attached to the soldiers convalescing, and then learned very quickly they would be sent back to war, and so many of them would die. So she kind of, is growing up among all these horrors, right? And then the war is over, and everyone kind of expects that London society is just going to continue as if there'd never been a war. And to a certain extent, it kind of does. And she has her debut, and it's presented to the king and queen, but she's doing it at Holyrood because she's Scottish. Her father's title is a Scottish title. And she, goes to parties with the Prince of Wales and his younger brother Bertie. And Bertie is absolutely infatuated with Elizabeth from the minute he meets her. And she's not quite so infatuated, and she probably was in love with his equerry, but Bertie perseveres. I mean, I think, for all his hits, and I think a lot of them are kind of, unfortunately, because of his relationship with his father. Like, evidently, Bertie was left-handed, but at the time that wasn't acceptable. So he had to have his left hand tied to his body and learn to be right-handed. That's why many people think he had the stutter that he had, right? But he has a kindness, and I think he's very handsome too. He's not as striking as his older brother, but I think he's very handsome. And he has a kindness and a determination to overcome his perceived impediments. And he doesn't give up, and he proposes to Elizabeth 3 times, and she finally accepts him.
And she says no initially, I think, because she was just like, I don't want the royal family, like that is, I don't want, that's choosing to marry one of the people in this family means choosing a life. It's not just like, I like this guy, let's make it work. It's like, no, it's this huge commitment. And she just like doesn't know if she wants that. And I respect that she really thought this through. Yeah.
Even if he's not going to be king, he's still, a prominent member of the royal family. And of course, when you become, I think everyone finds out, when you marry into the royal family, it's like suddenly your family doesn't exist anymore, right? I mean, it's like, and they're always going to take precedent and dictate where you're going to live, where you're going to spend the time. And, and I do think Elizabeth was fundamentally, I don't want to say lazy, but she didn't like to work real hard. I think she enjoyed life. She had a great capacity to enjoy life. And she was cosseted and spoiled, and she had a charming smile, and she was very pretty for her era, and wanted to be adored by all, and she was, and that was good for her. That would be enough of a life for her, and Bertie was gonna upend that, but she eventually was won over by, I think, his just determination. And who doesn't want to be adored that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
and he put her on a pedestal. And so they marry, and it is a happy marriage. And they have the two little girls. But Elizabeth was manipulative in her own way. I think she had very good friends with David. And I think she enjoyed, even though the royal brothers, and there were three other boys and a girl in the family, and the younger Prince John died as a child. So there's the Duke of Kent, and then what's the other one?
I don't know. I only know about
Anyway,
these two.
and then there's the Princess Royal. But Elizabeth was like the sister-in-law of all these handsome royal princes, and she enjoyed being the center of attention, and she was, for a long time. And then Wallis comes along, and so think, I think Elizabeth was a little jealous. I mean, there are rumors that Elizabeth had been in love with the Prince of Wales, and he did not return. She wasn't his type. She was
No,
not
like the
angular.
American divorcee.
She
Yeah.
was, yeah, she wasn't an
Married
American
American
divorcee.
woman. Yeah.
And she wasn't high society. She's a little plump. She had the beautiful English complexion, but she didn't dress very fashionably at all. She was happy to let her mother-in-law, Queen Mary's dressmaker, make her dresses for a very long time. So she's just not his cup of tea. So but some people thought she was in love with him when she was a young debutante, and so that may have been the source of some of her irritation with Wallis Simpson. But I think Wallis very much looked down on Elizabeth. Like, a lot of people underestimate that kind of domestic English rose, right? And I think Elizabeth proved that she was not to be underestimated. And I think she proved to be very adept at manipulating the press and getting pictures of her and her beautiful, darling daughters in the press to counteract, and when the press became aware of Wallis, to kind of counteract Wallis's that image and make Wallis look like the Scarlet Woman. And I think I speculate in my novel, but I wouldn't be surprised if Elizabeth had been responsible for turning the press onto Wallis and David and leaking all that.
I will say, because I've just finished doing all these episodes about the Regency era, and so that's like 200 years earlier. The British royal family was leaking to the tabloids. Like, this is, I would be surprised if she wasn't, because that's just what this family has been doing since tabloids were invented, just to sort of jockeying for popularity among the public, but also just within the family. Like, so I think I'd be surprised if she hadn't done that, because everyone was doing that and had been.
Well, I think she did. And I think she was very much the one when all this happened. I mean, again, I don't think Elizabeth woke up one morning and said, "Oh, I want to be queen. I will make this happen." I don't think that happened at all. I don't think she really wanted to be queen, but I don't think she hated being queen either. Like, Bertie was terrified of the notion of being king. He didn't want to be king. He wished, but when it starts to become a possibility that David's going to abdicate, I think Elizabeth just kind of perks up and goes, "I would be very good at this." And she was very good at this. Hitler, during the war, called her the most dangerous woman in all of Europe because of, just her courage and pluck and her smile and this deceptively soft exterior, but inside was a spine of steel.
And I think I think about Queen Elizabeth II also. I think that's the thing about the, like, quote unquote English rose, or Kate Middleton also, where it's like, you look so sweet and pretty, but you're so strong. Like, I think that's like, and I think in World War II that really sort of solidified as sort of the British identity. And
they became. Yeah, I think World War II, it is very, very hard, impossible to imagine an England by which there was a King Edward and Queen Wallis on the throne during World War II. Not only because of the alleged Nazi stuff, but it's just impossible to imagine them rising to the occasion the way Bertie and Elizabeth did. I think the war made them. Like, had it not been for the war, they would not have been solidified, as the absolute emblem of British people and pluck. and just idolized and revered in the way that they were. Had the war not happened, I think they just would have been, king and queen, but like not all that special, right? But I think the war made them, especially Bertie, kind of step up into this leadership. He became more comfortable speaking. He became more comfortable leading people because he was always like he's the king, but he'd walk into a room and he'd try to kind of like hide away because he didn't think anyone wanted to talk to him. But he's the freaking king. And whereas Elizabeth would walk into a room and just turn it off, she loved the attention. But Bertie did not. But I think the war made him into a figure who, led a nation, and everyone acknowledged, Elizabeth especially acknowledged, that she was the power behind the throne. She was the helpmate for the king. She was the woman who made the king. She was not afraid to I think, maybe plant some of those stories in the press.
It's interesting. I'm sure she didn't plant this story, but the fact that she was born in this Macbeth castle and then she's kind of the woman who's the power behind the king is kind of like, okay, it's a bit on the nose. Okay.
Yeah, a little bit on the nose. We're not quite Lady Macbeth. I wouldn't call her Lady Macbeth.
I wouldn't call her Lady Macbeth, but like some aspects.
Wallis and David, they saw through her, I think, in a way that nobody else did. Like they knew, and they called her Cookie in a very dismissive way. They were both, Wallis and Edward David, in case people are getting confused, Edward David, same person. They were both very stylish, very fashion forward. They were both, I would say, anorexic. I
was going to say they're both very thin. They're both chain smoking.
And a lot of people suspect that perhaps they had eating disorders. That even before he met her, evidently David dieted religiously, exercised like a madman, was very obsessed with his figure, and Wallis was as well. And then you have Elizabeth, who was, I don't want to. I know today we talk about body image in a very, very different way. Back then, everybody's weight and their appearance was, that was just, fair game. People would just, and so back then, Wallis and David, certainly privately and publicly made fun of Elizabeth for her appearance. Let's just say she just enjoyed her teas and her alcohol. She was very famous for being
That's one of the things I know about her. She liked to drink a lot, but also just like, even if we're not looking at the bodies, she had like a round face, and Wallis had a very like angular, bony face. Like just from the neck up, they clearly look very different.
Well, people do suspect that Wallis had that intersex condition called androgen insensitivity syndrome, where that she was born with XY, the male chromosomes, but developed more as a female. No one knows for sure if that was it, but she was always very different looking, from
straight up and down sort of figure.
Very no hips, no waist, no bosom. Very, the strong jaw. She never had children. So that's another people speculate about that. And again, you just compare that to Elizabeth, who had the more, traditional, like 1930s, 1940s kind of softer figure, very feminine in her appearance for sure. And anyway, so it all leads to that David and Wallis always called her Cookie because she resembled a cook. Or perhaps she had been sired, or her mother was a cook. There's Lady Colin Campbell wrote a very interesting biography of Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, and where she called into question her parentage. That there was a rumor that her mother was not able to bear children anymore, so that her father had relations with a French cook in their household to get the last two children because they wanted a bigger family.
Nine was not enough, but you did say there was that gap. There was all the siblings, and then she and one brother.
And then the two of them, there was quite a gap. And Lady Colin Campbell in her biography brings this up. I've never seen anyone else mention that, but if it was a rumor, I could definitely see Wallis and David spreading that rumor.
This is the thing. This is the thing. Like, even, it takes me back to episodes I've done talking about ancient Rome or something. Like, what we're left with as historians, historical fiction writers, is looking at the records that were left by people who hated other people. So it's like, is this true, or did someone just spread this rumor? Like stuff about, exactly. Like, was this really her parentage? It's like, well, why would someone, maybe Wallis, spread that rumor? But then it's like the fact that Wallis might have had this intersex condition, which like is a thing that we understand better now. Still not a lot of acceptance, but there's been other people in history where people are like, oh, but were they secretly intersex? And that was used as kind of a slander. Like, it's so like we can't trace back where these rumors come from. So all you can do is just kind of be like, well, Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon was this domestic seeming goddess with these children, and she's got her round figure, and Wallis is like thin and on a diet and no children. Like, it's easy to see what weapons these women would have had against each other, like how they could criticize the other one just based on societal prejudice.
And we have to talk about the China dossier. So Wallis spent a year in China, and she was married to her first husband. And she always called it her lotus year. And she also always favored a lot of Chinese and Japanese kind of styles. She would wear.
It was well suited to her like trim figure,
very much, and collected jade and porcelain and decorated her homes in that way. And so we think, at least I think, that as the situation is getting worse and worse with the abdication, and they've got to find a way to stop David from being obsessed with this woman, that perhaps Elizabeth kind of started rumors about what Wallis was actually getting up to while she was in China, including visiting Chinese brothels and learning how to please a man in that way. And that becomes part of the rumors that are still surrounding Wallis Simpson today. And I fully believe that Elizabeth would have done that. That's another example of her exerting power and controlling a narrative and slandering her rival in a gossipy kind of frivolous, feminine way, but yet like setting government officials on the case to go find this stuff out. And like to this day, we don't know whether there was a China dossier, but it was definitely rumored during the abdication. And Wallis was aware of it, and David was too. There was a rumor that it existed. And
it's such a classic. I can't even tell you how many examples I have, but like Marie Antoinette and Mary, Queen of Scots, and like every Roman queen, like there's rumors of like, and she spent the night in a brothel. It's like that. Oh, it's a classic slander, and you can never prove or disprove it, but it sticks to people.
It's like, how else could she bewitch the Prince of Wales? Yeah. How could she steal our king were it not for evil, exotic ways? I mean,
she learned these and especially then where you're looking at like Asia as this foreign place, and just like
the way they sexualize
these techniques from these like Chinese women, and it like steals our British men. Like,
I mean,
if you're Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, that's your weapon, is just to make her look like the trashiest, most vulgar slut.
Yep.
And it's dangerous to the country, really.
And it's
like,
dangerous to the country. And it's
slutty.
Yeah. And so the government, turned against, and not that I don't think the government would ever have allowed it anyway, but, it's just one more reason for the government to force him to abdicate or give her up or abdicate, and then he chose to abdicate. I truly don't think she wanted him to abdicate. I think she really...
There's nothing in it for her. I think she saw that, like, this is going to ruin both of our lives. Yeah. Like, I'll be her mistress, marry some Princess Diana type. Like, let's just keep going. Yeah.
Yeah, and evidently they even talked about... I have this in my book, but like, there were discussions like, let her be another Maria Fitzhubert, I think it was, who was like the mistress of George IV. And they're like, just if she would do that. And I'm like, listen, even called her the king's little cutie. He's like, well, let the king have his cutie. And he's referring to Wallis Simpson. Now, was she more ambitious than that? I mean, I actually don't. I think at times she probably did allow herself to believe she could be queen. I mean, like, what girl wouldn't in this case, right? You got David telling you, I will not be crowned without you by my side. Of course, you're going to let your fantasies. But I don't think that was her original goal. I don't think that was like when she became aware of the Prince of Wales back in 1931 or 32, whenever it was, I don't think she said, "Oh, I will become Queen of England." I don't think that was ever it. I think she probably would have been okay, staying married to her husband and just being his mistress.
I just wanted to point out, I don't think I've ever said this in the podcast, but whenever I'm doing research in any time period and somebody seems like they're going to become king or queen, but they have a really interesting, cool name, I always know they're never going to do it because the kings and queens are always the queens are always Mary, Elizabeth, and there's not going to be a Queen Wallis. That's never going to happen. But it's like when you're going back in history, you're like, there was never a King Roger. And then you're like, oh, and then he was executed. Okay, yeah, got it. Like,
that's interesting.
With an interesting name, it's like, oh, this is a spoiler for me because I know this isn't going to happen. I know you're not going to marry Wallace.
But oftentimes they do take different names, though,
true,
right?
True, when they become king, yeah.
Albert became George, and David became Edward, and
so
famously
when Wallace, she might have become she could have become Victoria, or she might have changed.
Yeah, it. I think it's only usually the actual king or queen ruling that changes their name, right? Mm-hmm. Because I think Elizabeth II was famously asked, "What will be your regnal name?" And she was like, "Elizabeth." But she was lucky. I mean, but she could have been another Victoria had she chosen to do that. I
don't know. Sorry, I meant to ask you this earlier on, but her name is so unusual. I've never heard of anyone else called Wallis. And it was her father's name or something like that?
Yeah. So she was born Bessie Wallis. That was her given name. I think Wallis was her father's name, and Bessie. So Bessie Wallis Warfield was the name she had at birth. And then her father died she was only 5 months old when her father died. And then her mother became dependent on her father's brother for to live, even though that she was kind of genteel poverty. And then so she was born Bessie, and always said it. And when she was in grade school, she changed her name. She was like, Bessie Wallace sounds like a cow. She does. So then she just switched it and became Wallace, and she just dropped the Bessie. So that's just an early example of this woman creating her own narrative, right? And leaning into what makes her different and striking. Because I think she knew that money-wise, she had the good breeding, but she didn't have the money, and she didn't have the traditional feminine looks of everyone else in her class. I mean, you see pictures of her in her boarding school. She's very striking. I mean, she just does not blend in at all with that angular figure and all. I think she just learned early on, I will stand out by playing up my differentness, my otherness. And I think she probably embraced the idea of an unusual name, of Wallis.
I think, and that just adds to the whole thing too, that it's Wallis, this American, modern woman with this kind of androgynous name and kind of androgynous look versus Elizabeth, the perfect English rose with her, curvy figure and her two daughters. It's just it's such a you write fiction, but this is someone making up a story might have come up with the same name and opposite people.
True. That's true. They couldn't. Opposite. And then we have the Meghan and Kate thing now. I mean, it is there are parallels. There are a lot of differences, but there are parallels, So I think, and then, that's one reason why I wrote the book, because when I'm writing novels set in the past, I am always looking for ways to tie them into the present, whether it's the issues women are facing or in this case, as I'm writing, I'm going, feuding Windsor brothers, here we are again. And then the whole Andrew Mountbatten thing, all that happened. All the more recent, things happening with him being arrested and all that happened long after I had already turned the book in. Mm-hmm. But I see the parallel there between that, his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein and all that, with David and Wallace's relationship with Hitler.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
I think in the Windsor's case, the royal family, they knew long before the public ever found out. They knew what was going on between Hitler and the Windsors. But they're back then, the government and the royal family, I think, wanted to protect the royal family more than maybe they do today, and the press did too, so that this stuff was not made public until decades later. But we now call into question, like, how much does King Charles, did he know of his brother's involvement with Epstein, and did he try to suppress it? And you can say the way that the royal family suppressed
Yeah.
the Nazi stuff back in the day.
Well, that's the thing. Like, you mentioned about how, like, Kate Middleton is somebody who presents as sort of like someone from maybe a few generations earlier than the age that she actually is. And Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon was also sort of old-fashioned. So the royal family themselves just, they have this old-fashioned quality where I think they're trying to, I think successfully, they're portraying themselves as sort of timeless, kind of ageless, like the modern world doesn't affect us. And then you get someone like Wallis Simpson, or how David or Meghan Markle, but even how David was dressing. Like, he was being like, I'm having affairs with like educated women, and like he was too modern for what the royal family wanted to present themselves as. And it kind of worked out in a way, I mean, to the detriment of Bertie dying so young, that they came in and they're this kind of perfect domestic family, so stalwart during World War II, and that kind of rebranded the royals as like, we're, like, it's this kind of like, we're solid, we're timeless, we're classic.
I do think that, like, this idea of the royal family is just kind of like the family of England. Like, Victoria was like the mother of England. I mean, that has become a stronger branding message, I think, as the decades have gone on. Like, there was some of that with Victoria. There was some of that with George and Mary after World War I. But still, like, King George and Queen Mary were really like regal figures. Like, there was nothing warm about either of them, or maternal or paternal about either of them. And then you get, Bertie and Elizabeth and their two little daughters, where that's like the moment where the royal family really leans into this like middle class kind of image, but make it royal, right? And it didn't work with Diana and Charles. It just didn't work. And so what happens after all that, and Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip, I mean, to a certain extent, they still kind of carried on that happy family kind of image, even if it really maybe wasn't behind the scenes. But then Charles and Diana kind of blow it out of the water. So what happens next? You get William and Kate. It's like, I don't know if it's intentional or they're just lucky, but it's like whenever something comes along to kind of shake up the royal family and make it, in peril, make people question whether or not, why am I paying these people to be, live in castles? Then somehow, because there was a very real fear with the abdication that this would be the end of the royal family.
Yeah. And it could have been.
Yeah, it could have been. It could have been. And then what happens? You get, you get David and Bertie and Elizabeth and little daughters, and then that secures the age of Elizabeth II, and it's very stable. Then Charles and Diana come along, and things are rocky again. And now you have William and Kate, and their beautiful children, and their happy families to secure the future again. I just find it very interesting that it seems like after a real crisis, they lean into the domestic thing. And they happen to have the right people to do it.
Exactly. But then it's kind of like, to have the domestic thing, you need to have the villain who you have to portray as sort of like, well, this is the opposite.
And unfortunately, it was, I think, unfortunately, Meghan and maybe less unfortunately, Wallis. I think they're so similar in that but I mean, they just like represent their times better. Like, Wallis was a divorcee when that was starting to be acceptable. And she drank cocktails and she wore Chanel when that was kind of high society, and the opposite of Elizabeth. And then Meghan comes along and she's got her career, and she's, got her own identity, and she's, biracial, and she represents current times better than I will say that Kate Middleton does. I mean, she just represents who the world is. And it's their modernity that is threatening to the royal family and to a lot of British people who prefer the royal family to remain stuck in traditions decades past.
I think also, I want to like, it's just there's some overlapping themes, but I like Meghan Markle is such a different person from Wallis Simpson. Wallis Simpson,
Absolutely.
like, affiliated with Nazis, grew up in a really racist time, was a really racist person. Meghan Markle, biracial, That's not what she's up to. But the
Yeah.
fact that both of them could care less about the royal family, I think, is also threatening. The fact that they're American, like you were saying, like Wallis didn't necessarily want to be queen, and Meghan fell in love with Harry as a person, seemingly.
Yeah.
Like neither of them was like, I understand and I'm going to be part of this family. They're both just kind of like, well, I like this guy, so we're going to hang out and see where it goes. Versus Elizabeth, who's like, and Kate, who I think were like, I am intentionally going to marry into this
Yeah, no, I
infrastructure.
definitely. Yeah, I think there. I mean, maybe Elizabeth not so intentionally since she turned him down twice, but
She
there
knew what
is
she was
that. But I mean, she certainly knew that when marrying, what marrying into the royal family was going to mean to her, and she was not going to upset the boat, and neither was Kate. Like they accept what being married into the royal family means to the women, and Meghan absolutely didn't accept that, and neither would Wallis have accepted that.
I just wonder if another American, next generation enters the scene. Like, is this going to happen again? Like, do Americans fundamentally are they never? I don't know if Louis or George starts dating an American, I could see the British press being like, no,
I mean, I
not
don't
again.
know. I mean, to be honest, I don't know I don't know what the future of the royal family is. No one knows. I feel that they're in a real weird place right now. Like where losing losing Meghan and Harry, I think was so bad for everybody involved. I think Harry and Meghan could have really. If you look at the pictures from the last gathering of the working royals, there was no one under the age of 40 in that photo, right? And so they're quickly becoming. I mean, they're just like the only young people are Kate and William at this point, and they're very particular to their children. They're not going to let their children go out there and be a working royal too soon, right? So it's like I feel like the royal family's kind of on the verge of dying out, and because of that, like they're losing all of the young royals who for whatever reasons, they're not working royals anymore. And the ones that are there are so old. And also, the whole what's going on, how much they knew about Andrew and Epstein, I think that is going to damage them. And it is already damaging them. I mean, King Charles is out there doing his thing, but he's getting a lot of people asking, what did you know? I don't know what the future of the royal family is. And choosing to remain so rooted in the traditions of the past as far as Kate and William. And like they don't seem to want to, like he's already said he doesn't want to live at Buckingham Palace. I just don't know how much. I don't know. I think it's going to be really interesting to see. I don't know that tradition is going to save them in this case, is what I'm probably trying to say.
I think it's interesting because your book, The Windsor Affair, out now. It's available this week. Like I feel like books on this topic, like it couldn't be more timely because of like Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, and people the British royal family is never not in the news. So I think that this, for your first full-on British royal family based book, it connects maybe to current events so strongly. I think that'll be really interesting to see how people respond to it, because I think there are a lot of people who don't know this story of the abdication crisis and who Wallis was and who Elizabeth was. I think it'll be interesting. I couldn't read this book and not think about parallels to modern day. So much of what we just talked about is parallels to modern day. I think it's really interesting to have a historical fiction novel that's so connected with modern times.
Well, yeah, thanks. No, I mean, I certainly, that's always my intention. But although, people have been writing about the royal family since Shakespeare's times, right? I mean, they fascinate. And like, I kind of look at it as like, this is a family drama. This book is a family drama. Yeah. This happens to be royal, but it is a family drama. Like we all have issues with brothers and sisters-in-laws not getting along. I mean, it just happened to change history.
Well, and then also I would say, just similar to your other book about like Truman Capote and the women, it's just, I don't know if people make this comparison, but it's like today people love watching like the reality TV, like the housewives and what they're up to. And it's that sort of drama, but just dressed up differently. Like people have always messy and complicated relationships. Like it's that sort of vibe too, I think.
Very, very Real Housewivesy. It's like Real Housewives of the Windsors. And there could be a reality series. So very, very much. And like I was kind of like, kind of Royal Mean Girls too, right?
Very much.
I mean, the way these two women hated each other all their lives, until the very end. I think the very end, perhaps there was an acknowledgement of the ties that bind, even when you're on opposite sides of history, right?
Yeah.
Like when you're the last one standing, like as these two women were, from the whole thing that was their personal family drama that absolutely changed history. It's like there's a realization that there is something that binds you together, in the end. But yeah.
So I'm just looking at your website. You've got various events that you're going to be doing promoting this book. So if people want to see where you're going to be, to attend some of your events, what is the best thing? Just looking at your website or social media, or what are you up to?
I'm on Substack, called Melanie Benjamin, the Reluctant Extrovert. And so I do a lot of Substack. I'm on Instagram, Facebook. I got my website, melaniebenjamin.com. There is, a section for events. There's a section that I will be putting together. Now, I have it for all my books. This is my 9th historical fiction. And so I have a page for all my books about a lot of the history that we talked about here, and maybe even more that behind the book. So like the things that I don't mention in my novel, but to help you understand the background of these people and the times, there will be a whole section for that. So those are always a lot of fun. And then for book clubs, I have a whole section for book clubs. I have reading guides, discussions. Please, I'm always happy to try to schedule a visit with your book club, usually by Zoom, if it works out for our schedule. So I urge you, if you choose this book or any book, please go to my website, my section for book clubs, and we can maybe find a way for me to dip in. We're also doing some giveaways for those people who choose the book for their book clubs. It's available on bookshop.org and all your favorite indies and the usual retailer places. There's a lot of stuff on my website. There's a lot of good stuff. And cocktail guide. There's a cocktail guide for all my books that I have there. Yeah, and it has mocktails as well. So it's like old, like actual cocktails of the times and modern versions, and then a mocktail version. We've got that up there. So yeah, spend some time on my website. Long stuff to do.
I feel this book. I'm sure you got some good cocktail ideas for these two women.
Well, the Queen, my favorite, the one I want to try, I've not been able to try it, is like famously the Queen Mother. She loved a good martini. I like a good martini too. But her drink of choice, like Elizabeth II, was a Dubonnet and gin. I've never been able to find Dubonnet. It's some kind of fortified wine, and I cannot find it. So I am to taste. And then there's a cocktail called the Wallis Blue that was named, made for Wallis during her lifetime. That looks fun too. So yeah, all this stuff will be up there.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for talking about this with me. I think I love all of your books. I'm excited to have gotten to talk to you. And I think this one, it's gonna hit. I think the timing is so good for this book to be out there in the world. I think it'll be really interesting to see the responses to this one.
I think we're always fascinated by the royals. We, even in America, maybe especially in America and Canada, because they're not actually here. We're not actually paying for them, but it's like they're celebrities, and everyone's always fascinated by celebrities' lives.
It's like a soap opera, and it's just like when one character ages, it's like, guess what? Now there's a kid, and now like it's just unending.
It just goes on and on and on, from Shakespeare to Melanie Benjamin. There you go.
There you go. Put that on your book. Thank you so much for the conversation. Everybody go read this book, The Windsor Affair. It's so good. And then book Melanie for your book club.
Well, yes, please. And thank you, Anne, so much. I enjoy your podcast a lot. I've learned a lot.
Thank you so much. So Melanie's book, The Windsor Affair, is available everywhere where you get books. And what's interesting is she and I spoke a lot about compare and contrast these British royal wives from a century ago with what's happening in modern times. If you want to hear more of a discussion about the actual oldie-timey British royal family, what was happening with Wallis and with Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, our friends Amanda Matta and Meredith Constant have a podcast called Off With Their Headlines. They also interviewed Melanie Benjamin, and it's funny because their podcast is usually about today's modern royal family, and they wound up talking about the history with Melanie, whereas my podcast is about the olden times, and Melanie and I wound up talking a lot about today's 21st century royal wives. Anyway, so it's a complementary pairing of podcasts, beautiful pairing. So if you go to just listen to Off With Our Headlines, wherever you get your podcasts from. Speaking of that, I've been a guest on a few of my other friends' podcasts I want to let you know about. So I was on recently the podcast Ticklish Business, which is hosted by our friends Kristen Lopez and Emily Edwards, and I was talking about the 1940 film version of Pride and Prejudice, which is a really fun conversation. It's not a version of Pride and Prejudice that comes up when people talk about it, although a few weeks ago when I had June Her on this podcast, it was her first exposure to Pride and Prejudice, and so it was interesting to visit this film. You can hear me talking about it with them on the podcast Ticklish Business. And I was also a guest on my friend Jerry's podcast, The Presidencies of the United States. So this is a podcast where what Jerry does is he goes through in great detail the various different presidents of the United States and what was it like before they were president, when they were president. And this is where I come in, and what was their first lady like. So I'm talking about James Monroe's first lady, whose name was Elizabeth. And it was a fun time. I had a really fun time doing this episode. Elizabeth Monroe, interesting lady. Their daughters, also interesting. And just the time period of this is around the American Revolution era. So you hear mention of a bunch of people that came up in our Regency era episodes and the French Revolution series episode, like Lafayette makes an appearance. Lots of people who we've talked about, but from an American point of view. Anyway, so that's called the Presidencies of the United States podcast. You can hear me talking on there as well. And if you just can't get enough of me talking, I also have a Patreon, and if you become a paid member of the Patreon, I do a bonus episode about every month or so where my friends Allison Epstein, Lana Wood Johnson, and I talk about a movie that one of us likes. It's a historical costume drama, or recently about a book that one of us likes. It's an oldie time book. Allison's great favorite book is Dracula by Bram Stoker, and there's a new episode where the three of us discuss Dracula by Bram Stoker, and it's a really fun time. So you can listen to that if you join my Patreon at patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter. And I wrote a book. It's called Rebel of the Regency. It's available to buy wherever you get your books from. It's just yet another story about the men of the British royal family being terrible to their wives. It's a story that seems to keep repeating throughout all of history. And I'll just say one more thing, which is that I had been doing a fundraiser to raise money for the Trevor Project, which is an American organization that provides 24-hour, 7 days a week support to LGBTQIA youths who are in crisis. And it's such a great organization to support. And if you are in crisis, you should reach out to them. They check out their website and all that stuff. If you want to support a fundraiser, it was going to end at the end of May, but it's going for one more week. So until June 6th, you can go to vulgarhistory.com/Trevor, vulgarhistory.com/Trevor, and you can check out this beautiful t-shirt designed by our friend Jan Upater, which shows queer people from the Regency era we talked about last series on the show. So it's people like the Chevalier d'Eon is there. Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire is there. The ladies of Llangollen, Anne Lister. The ladies of Llangollen's cat is called Sappho. It's a beautiful, rainbow-colored print on this beautiful ringer t-shirt you can get. Anyway, when you get one of these t-shirts from our fundraiser, all the profits go towards the Trevor Project, and you can also make a donation there to the Trevor Project. So again, you can get that. I think it looked really cute if you're doing stuff for Pride Month in June. The fundraiser is happening until June 6th, so just go to vulgarhistory.com/Trevor. And until next time, my friends, keep your pants on and your tits out. Vulgar History is researched, scripted, and hosted by Anne Foster. Editor is Christina Lumagi. Theme music is by the Severn Duo. Regency-era artwork by Karen Moynihan. Social media videos by Magdalena Denson. Transcripts of this podcast are available at vulgarhistory.com by Aveline Malik. You can get early, ad-free episodes of Vulgar History by becoming a paid member of our Patreon at patreon.com/AnneFosterWriter. Vulgar History merchandise is available at vulgarhistory.com/store for Americans and at vulgarhistory.redbubble.com for everyone else. Follow us on social media at Vulgar History Pod. Get in touch with me at vulgarhistorypod@gmail.com.